Hello and welcome back to another update where I cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. It is your host Sweep Union and this is the final update of the year. We have significant developments in today's update that really leaves us on a cliffhanger for the coming year. The Russians have started additional operations in the southern flank of Sudzha, flanking the city itself. The Russians at the same time have managed to capture a significant portion of the industrial area of Kurakhove, leaving the Ukrainians on their last stand on the outskirts of the city, and this means that the city has now fallen under Russian hands. The Russians have advanced further along the western and southeastern flanks of Pokrovsk. The Russians have advanced within the southwestern flank of Toretsk. The Russians have advanced in the Siversk section of the front line, and the Russians have captured the village of Terny along the Serbets river line. Starting out in the Kursk region, we see that the Russians have made significant advances in the southern flank of Sudzha. They've managed to gain a foothold in the northeastern parts of Makhnovka. At the same time, they're advancing both from the southeastern and southern flanks of the settlement. They're moving along the southern bank of the Reka Sudzha, which is the Sudzha River. They have also managed to advance further along, capturing the first patch southwest of Makhnovka and advancing along the fortified positions south of Sudzha. The Russians are also fighting over the village here southwest of Makhnovka. With this, the Russians continue their flanking maneuvers. As I have claimed several times, the Russians are planning on cutting off the supplies in and out of the Kursk region by advancing along the southern flanks of Sudzha, both in the direction of Svetlikova in the northwestern direction and through the southern flank of Sudzha, all in an attempt to completely encircle the Ukrainian forces, all located within the Kursk region. Today's advances are a significant development with regards to that, as the Russians are now within the southern outskirts of the Sudzha agglomerate of villages, which consists of about 10 villages, all with several fortified positions all around the area, to which the Russians are now fighting over. Moving on to the Serbets river line direction, the Russians have managed to capture the remaining parts of Terny, reaching the outskirts of the settlement, to which the border between Terny and Polivka begins. The Russians have been geolocated at the southern outskirts of Terny. With the capture of the first patch southeast of Terny and the fortified positions there, it was only a matter of time before the Russians gained control of the remaining parts, and now the Russians have a significant position here along the Serbets river line to start attacking Polivka both from the eastern direction and from the northern direction to gain control over that as well, which is the final outpost of the Ukrainian forces ahead of Torske, which is the main defensive line and choke point from which the Ukrainians are defending the city of Liman, and the battles over these settlements will begin in the new year. Just to the south of this, the Russians are storming the fortified positions of the Ukrainians northwest of Ivanodarivka, located on the high ground. They've also withdrawn from Viemka due to the Russian presence there being vulnerable to Ukrainian fire from the fortified positions both to the southeast of Siversk and northwest of Ivanodarivka. Both of these fortified positions are areas which are heavily fortified outposts of the Ukrainians that they are using to defend the southern flank of Siversk. The Russians are now fighting over one of three of these fortified positions that are located in the southern flank. If the Russians manage to capture the one northwest of Ivanodarivka, they'll be able to secure their hold over Ivanodarivka and Viemka and start the battle towards the next one, which is located just outside of Siversk. Following that, the Russians will be able to reach the city itself. The Russians would also be able to fight over Verkhnokamiansky in an attempt to actually hold the settlement if they manage to capture fortified positions right here, as it will allow them to advance on a wider front and at the same time to cover supply lines in and out of the settlement from the southern direction as well as from the northern direction due to the limited Ukrainian presence in the northern flank near Ryorivka and Serebrienka. This means that the Ukrainian positions near Siversk would be significantly weakened. However, again, there are three of these fortified positions and the Russians would only control one of them. That means that there are additional 2 steps before the Russians can consider themselves in a very advantageous position here in the direction of Siversk, which the Ukrainians have a significant advantage over the Russians due to their hold over these fortified positions. and their hold over the geographical advantages. In the direction of the southern flank of Toretsk, north of New York, the Russians have managed to capture the majority of Leonidivka and are fighting over some fortified positions on the high ground west of the settlement. The Russians are here looking to gain full control over the high ground and fortified positions there to gain control over Sherbinivka and Novospeske. Control over both of these settlements will allow the Russians to flank the remaining fortified positions of the Ukrainians west of Toretsk and open up the way to the final line of defense of the Ukrainians south of Konstantinivka, which will significantly weaken the Ukrainian positions north of Avdiivka, which is these sets of fortified positions. The Russians can advance along the river line here south of Konstantinivka to gain control over the supply line going to and from the city, and this will significantly limit the supplies going to and from the fortified zones. A push north of Novoalexandrivka towards Zelenopole would cut off the remaining road to and from this set of fortified positions, and the Ukrainians would be operationally encircled in this entire area. This means that the Russians would be able to cover a massive amount of fortified positions of the Ukrainians and significantly improve their positions in the northern flank towards the southern flank of Sloviansk Konstantinivka line and the main defensive line of the Ukrainians within the Donetsk region that remains under Ukrainian control. The Russians have advanced further in the direction of Vostyshenka, but have managed to gain control over some forest lines south of the settlement. This is positional fighting towards the fortified positions of the Ukrainians south of Vostyshenka, expanding the zone of control of the Russians to gain control over those, and move along the fortified positions towards the northern parts of Vostyshenka to gain full control over the choke point and fortified positions of the Ukrainians here west of Novoalexandrivka, towards the intersection of the highway between Pokrovsk and Konstantinivka. The Russians have advanced south of Pokrovsk in the direction of Pyshane, capturing the industrial area, and they've managed to push the Ukrainians into the northern parts of the settlement, and they've also managed to gain a foothold within Solone, here north of Solone River. This is to improve their positions in the direction of the highway between Pokrovsk and Zaporizhzhia city, as well as the railways that connects the two cities. Within the city of Kurakhove, the Russians have gained control of the majority of the industrial zone. This leaves only the western outskirts as a last stand for the Ukrainians in the city of Kurakhove. With this, the city itself is under Russian control and secured, and the majority of the industrial zone is also under Russian hands. This means that the Ukrainian positions here west of Kurakhove are significantly weakened, and it is likely that the Ukrainians are either withdrawing or planning withdrawal from the remaining parts, away from the Vovcha river line, away from the Sukhyali river line, and into Konstantinopel, Andreevka, and Rusliv to set up new defensive positions along those settlements, as the Battle of Kurakhove has now been lost for the Ukrainians and the city has fallen. With this, there is only Velika Novosilka and Pokrovsk in the southern parts of the Donetsk region, following which there are no other cities remaining or any large population centers. And with that, the Russians have these two remaining targets in the northern and southern flanks of this section of the front line that they have to capture to gain full control over the southern parts of the Donetsk region and to flank the final and main defensive line of the Ukrainians in the Donetsk region, which will be the highlight of the war in 2025, as the Russians would look to gain full control over the Donetsk region in that year. 2025 will be another year with the war in Ukraine. The Russians will look to regain full control over the Kursk region and to gain full control over Luhansk, Donetsk, Zaporizhzhia, and Kherson in the year of 2025, and they will look to end the war militarily, not through negotiations. That is at least what the political officials of the Russian government are saying for the past few weeks. There will be a lot of factors to whether or not this will happen, including continuous aid to Ukraine, both military and political, for civilian populations and to continue the war, as well as sanctions and pressure on Russia, militarily and politically, to limit the military capabilities of Russia. All of these will have an effect on how long it takes for Russia to achieve these goals and whether or not they will continue beyond these goals. If pressure on Russia increases, it is unlikely that they will look to gain more territory under their control than the current announced goals. However, if it significantly decreases, it is likely that the Russians will go all out and look to gain control over a much larger area of Ukraine. In the end, these are questions for the next year, and that is going to be all for this one. Thank you all for watching. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe, check out my Patreon and YouTube membership, additional content. Thank you all for watching, and see you all next year.